She first sees him as a landscape of stillness in a room, usually thrumming with the quiet urgencies of healing. He's a silhouette against the pale green walls of room 312. His chart simply reading Alastair Finch, admitted following a single vehicle accident. Injuries significant, but, with time and care, not insurmountable. The most significant and baffling injury not listed on any medical scan, however, is his silence. A profound, unnerving silence that has persisted for 3 weeks. And Alara Vance, with her gentle hands and a voice that could coax secrets from stones, is tasked with coaxing him back to movement, and perhaps to words. This is the story of a nurse who dedicated herself to helping a silent patient walk again, never knowing he was the very billionaire who funded the floor she walked on, the machines that beeped comfortingly, the hope that filled the sterile air. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you believe love should feel like freedom, hit that like button and subscribe. She had no idea who he really was. This man who watched her with eyes that held entire, unread volumes. He was simply Mr. Finch, her patient, her project, her quiet, consuming mystery. And she, Alara, was about to become far more than just his nurse. Alara Vance moved through the corridors of St. Augustine's General with a quiet efficiency that belied the deep well of empathy she carried. Her days were a rhythm of soft-soled shoes on linoleum, the scent of antiseptic and floor wax, and the low hum of conversations about lives hanging in the balance. She wasn't a veteran, not yet, but she'd seen enough to know that healing was as much about the spirit as it was about sutures and splints. Mr. Finch, in room 312, was a testament to that. His body was mending, the bruises fading from angry purple to a mottled yellow-green, the long gash on his temple now a neat, pinkening line, but his spirit, it seemed, was still trapped somewhere in the wreckage of that car. Her colleagues had mostly resigned themselves to his silence. Catatonic, poor blighter, old Dr. Henderson had mumbled, peering at Mr. Finch over his spectacles. Or just stubborn as a mule. Give him time. But Alara felt something else in his stillness, a watchfulness, an intelligence that flickered in the depths of his gray eyes when he thought no one was looking. She'd taken to talking to him, a gentle, one-sided stream of chatter about the weather, the surprisingly decent hospital cafeteria muffins, the antics of the pigeons on his windowsill. It was during these monologues that she felt his gaze most intensely, not vacant, but listening. The hospital itself was a sprawling testament to modern medicine, and its newest wing, the Hawthorne Pavilion where Mr. Finch resided, was state-of-the-art. Everyone knew it was funded by an anonymous, incredibly wealthy benefactor. Whispers occasionally circulated about who it might be, a reclusive tech mogul, an old-money philanthropist. A recent article in the city paper, left folded on the nurse's station counter, mentioned the enigmatic A.T. and his continued generous, yet intensely private, contributions to local healthcare and arts. Alara had skimmed it, vaguely impressed, before her attention was pulled to a beeping monitor down the hall. The problems of billionaires felt very distant from the immediate, tangible needs of her patients. Mr. Finch's room was standard, but Alara tried to make it feel less sterile. A slightly sun-faded print of a Monet landscape she'd found in a charity shop now hung opposite his bed. She kept the blinds angled to catch the morning light, but shield him from the afternoon glare. She learned his unspoken preferences: tea, not coffee, lukewarm. The window cracked open an inch, even on cooler days, to let in the sounds of the city, a distant siren, the rumble of a bus, life. She felt a burgeoning sense of protectiveness, this quiet man who seemed so utterly alone. He was beginning to feel like her secret, a puzzle only she was patient enough to try and solve. And in that quiet room, with the rhythmic beep of his monitor a steady counterpoint to her voice, Alara felt a peculiar sense of peace, a feeling that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The stakes, she realized with a jolt one afternoon as she adjusted his pillows, were becoming personal. If he never walked, never spoke, a small part of her would feel she had failed him. The first real flicker came on a Tuesday, a dreary, rain-lashed afternoon. Alara was preparing Mr. Finch for his physiotherapy session, a daily battle of wills that usually ended with him tolerating her efforts with a stoic, unyielding passivity. His legs, though healing, were weak from disuse and the trauma of the accident. "All right, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice cheerful despite the knot of frustration that often tightened in her chest during these sessions. "Let's see if we can't get these handsome legs of yours to remember what they're for, shall we?" She was helping him sit up, her arms supporting his back, when a sudden clap of thunder rattled the window pane. Instinctively, Mr. Finch flinched, his hand, thin and surprisingly strong, shooting out and gripping her forearm. It wasn't a painful grip, but it was undeniably tight, a reflex of fear or surprise. His eyes, usually distant, were suddenly sharp, focused on her, a spark of something raw and immediate in their depths. The moment lasted only a few seconds. Then, as quickly as it came, the tension left him. His hand loosened, though it didn't entirely withdraw, and his gaze dropped to the neutral space of his blanket-covered lap. But Alara's heart was hammering. It was the first truly unguarded reaction she'd seen from him, a crack in the silent facade. She kept her voice even. "Just a bit of thunder, Mr. Finch. Nothing to worry about. We're safe in here." She didn't mention the grip, nor the flash of fear in his eyes. But as she began the gentle range of motion exercises, she felt a subtle shift. There was a fraction less resistance in his limbs, infinitesimal cooperation that hadn't been there before. It was as if that small, involuntary connection had momentarily bridged the chasm of his silence. Later that day, during a particularly frustrating attempt to get him to use the parallel bars with the support of a harness and another therapist, a more senior, slightly brusque physiotherapist named Martin, Mr. Finch had remained stubbornly immobile, his weight a dead anchor. Martin, losing patience, had sighed audibly. "Honestly, Alara, sometimes I think we're wasting our time. If he doesn't want to walk." Alara had cut him off, her voice sharper than intended. "He will walk, Martin. He just needs encouragement." She'd felt Mr. Finch's eyes on her then, a flicker of something unreadable. After Martin left, muttering about his next patient, Alara had turned back to Mr. Finch. "He's wrong, you know," she said softly, her gaze direct. "I know you can do this. I just need you to meet me halfway. Just a little." For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. A single, tiny dip of his chin. Alara's breath caught. It was a response. A definite response. She didn't push it, didn't exclaim. She simply smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Finch. That's all I ask." She decided then, with a renewed sense of determination, that she wouldn't give up. This man, this silent, enigmatic Mr. Finch, was going to walk. And maybe, just maybe, he'd find his voice along the way too. The memory of his hand on her arm, the brief, startling connection, stayed with her, a small, warm ember in the quiet landscape of their interactions. The days that followed settled into a new rhythm, marked by those tiny, almost imperceptible shifts in Mr. Finch. Alara continued her one-sided conversations, narrating the mundane and the occasionally absurd happenings of hospital life. She told him about Mrs. Henderson in 308, who swore her prize-winning roses were communicating with her telepathically, and about Sal, the kindly old orderly, who hummed off-key opera arias while polishing the floors. She read to him sometimes, excerpts from novels she loved, poetry that spoke of resilience and the wild beauty of the world outside their shared, sterile space. She noticed he seemed to prefer the classics, his breathing deepening slightly when she read Tennyson or Keats. During physiotherapy, the progress was painstakingly slow, but it was there. That first tiny nod had been followed by a willingness to bear a little more weight on his legs, a flicker of effort in his eyes when she urged him to take a step. She learned to read the minute tightening of his jaw that signaled pain or fatigue, the almost invisible softening around his mouth that she interpreted as a kind of quiet approval. She celebrated every small victory with an enthusiasm that was infectious, even if her audience remained outwardly impassive. "You shifted your weight, Mr. Finch. Did you feel that? That was excellent," she'd exclaim, her smile genuine. She sometimes caught a faint glint in his eyes, something that might have been amusement, or perhaps just a reflection of her own bright energy. She found herself observing the small details about him. His hands, though currently lacking their full strength, were well-shaped, with long fingers. There was an old, faded scar above his left eyebrow, pale against his skin, that hinted at a life lived before this quiet room. His pajamas, standard hospital issue, seemed oddly incongruous on him. There was an inherent elegance in his stillness, in the way he held his head, that suggested finer fabrics and tailored lines. Once, while helping him change, she noticed a very faint, almost invisible stitched monogram on the inside collar of the shirt he'd been wearing when admitted, and a T. Alistair Thorne? Arthur Templeton? Her mind played with possibilities, a harmless diversion. One afternoon, she brought in a small, battered MP3 player, a relic from her student days, loaded with a random assortment of music. A little musical therapy, perhaps, Mr. Finch, she'd offered, placing small headphones gently over his ears. She started with some calming classical music, then, on a whim, switched to some old jazz standards. When a smoky, melancholic trumpet solo filled the air, she saw his fingers twitch against the blanket, his eyelids flicker. He didn't open his eyes, but for the first time, a distinct expression crossed his face, a profound sadness, so fleeting she almost missed it, but so deep it made her own heart ache. She quickly switched the music off, her hand hovering near his shoulder. "Sorry," she murmured. "Too much." He gave no sign, but the air in the room felt different, charged with an unspoken emotion. There were dead ends, too. Days when he seemed to retreat further into himself, his eyes veiled, his body heavy and unresponsive. On those days, Alara felt a pang of despair, a fear that she was imagining their connection, that she was simply projecting her own hopes onto his blank canvas. But then he would do something, a longer, more focused look, a fractional tensing of his hand as if he meant to reach for hers when she helped him sit up, and her hope would reignite. Her colleagues noticed the change in her, too. "You're spending a lot of time with Finch," remarked Sarah, another nurse, during a coffee break. "Think you're getting through to him?" Alara shrugged, a small smile playing on her lips. "I think he's getting through to me." One evening, flipping through a discarded financial magazine in the break room, a small article caught her eye. It was about Thorne Industries, a global conglomerate, and its famously reclusive CEO, Arthur Thorne, who hadn't been seen publicly in months following a personal leave for health reasons. A grainy photograph accompanied the piece, a man with strong features, intense eyes, and yes, a faint scar above his left eyebrow. Alara frowned. Arthur Thorne. A.T. The man in the photo was older, more severe-looking than her Mr. Finch, but there was a resemblance, something in the set of the jaw, the intensity of the gaze. She dismissed it as a coincidence. Billionaire CEOs didn't end up in standard hospital rooms under assumed names after car accidents. Did they? The thought, however, planted a tiny seed of unease. The breakthrough, when it came, was not a triumphant first step, but something far quieter and infinitely more profound. Alara was helping Mr. Finch with his evening meal, patiently spooning broth between his lips. He'd been more alert that day, his eyes following her movements around the room with an unusual focus. "The physical therapist, Martin, you know, the slightly grumpy one," she was saying, mostly to fill the silence. "He actually complimented your effort today. Said you were showing remarkable tenacity. High praise from him, believe me. He usually reserves remarkable tenacity for describing how stubbornly a wound refuses to heal." She smiled, dabbing his chin with a napkin. He watched her, his gray eyes unblinking. Then his hand, which had been resting limply on the bed cover, moved. Slowly, deliberately, it lifted, and his fingers brushed against hers where she held the napkin. It was the lightest of touches, a fleeting contact, but it sent a jolt through Alara. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. His gaze held hers, and for the first time, she saw something unequivocally clear in their depths, acknowledgement, and something more, gratitude. Then he did something that nearly made her drop the bowl of broth. He opened his mouth, not for food, but as if to speak. A small, hesitant sound escaped him, a mere breath, a dry rasp. It wasn't a word, not yet, but it was an attempt. Tears pricked Alara's eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. "Mr. Finch," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He swallowed, a visible effort. His lips moved again, shaping a sound. La-ra. Her name. He'd said her name. It was rough, hoarse from disuse, but it was undeniably her name. A wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled her knees washed over Alara. Joy, relief, a profound, aching tenderness. She set the broth bowl down on the bedside table with a slightly trembling hand. "Yes, Mr. Finch," she managed, her voice thick. He looked at her, a wealth of unspoken things in his eyes. Then he gave the smallest, faintest smile she had ever seen. It transformed his face, softening the harsh lines, illuminating the intelligence and warmth she had always sensed beneath the surface. "Thank you," he whispered, The words barely more than air, but to Alara, they were a symphony. She reached out, her fingers instinctively closing around his. His grip was weak, but it was there. "You're welcome, Mr. Finch," she said, her own smile watery but radiant. "You're so very welcome." The walk to the parallel bars the next morning felt different. There was a new energy in the room, a current of unspoken understanding that flowed between them. When Alara said, "Ready, Mr. Finch?" his eyes met hers, and he gave that tiny, almost imperceptible nod that now felt like a profound affirmation. With her steadying arm and the support of the bars, he took a step, and then another. They were hesitant, shaky, but they were steps. Real steps. Alara felt a triumphant laugh bubble up inside her. He was walking, and he had spoken. The silence was broken. The news of Mr. Finch's first words, and his first unaided steps with the parallel bars, spread through the Hawthorne Pavilion with surprising speed. Dr. Henderson had beamed, patting Alara on the shoulder and declaring her a miracle worker. Martin, the physio, had offered a grudging, "Well, I'll be. Good work, Vance." Alara simply felt a quiet, profound satisfaction. The real miracle, she thought, was Mr. Finch himself, the strength and resilience he was finally allowing himself to show. Their interactions changed subtly. He still didn't speak much. His voice was weak, and forming words seemed to tire him quickly. But he would murmur her name, a soft "Alara," when she entered the room, or a quiet "good" when she asked how he was feeling after a particularly strenuous physio session. His smiles, though still faint and fleeting, were more frequent. He watched her with an intensity that was no longer just observant, but deeply personal. She found herself blushing sometimes under his gaze, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. One afternoon, as she was helping him back to bed after a session that had seen him walk almost the entire length of the parallel bars, he paused, leaning heavily on her arm. "Tired?" she asked gently. He shook his head slightly. Then, looking directly at her, his gray eyes surprisingly clear, he said, his voice still raspy but gaining strength, "You didn't give up." Alara's heart swelled. "No, Mr. Finch," she said softly. "I didn't." "Why?" he whispered, the question hanging in the air between them. She met his gaze, her own honest and direct. "Because I saw you, Mr. Finch. Not just a patient, but you. And I believed you could do it." A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. He held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Alistair," he rasped. "Call me Alistair." Alara smiled. "All right, Alistair. And you can call me Alara." It felt like a significant step, a crossing of a boundary from professional care to something more personal, more real. She tried to ignore the little flutter in her stomach. He was her patient, but he was also Alistair, the man she had coaxed back from silence, the man whose quiet strength was beginning to captivate her in ways she hadn't anticipated. The following Monday, the fragile piece of room 312 was shattered. Alara arrived for her shift to find a distinct buzz of activity around Mr. Finch's, Alistair's room. Two impeccably dressed individuals, a man with a severe haircut and a leather briefcase, and a woman with an air of brisk, no-nonsense efficiency, stood just outside his door, conferring in hushed, urgent tones with the hospital administrator, Ms. Albright. Ms. Albright looked flustered, her usual composure ruffled. As Alara approached, Ms. Albright spotted her. "Ah, Nurse Vance. A moment, please." The two strangers turned, their expressions coolly appraising. The man, Alara noted, had the predatory stillness of a lawyer. "Nurse Vance," Ms. Albright said, her voice a little too bright, "these are associates of Mr. Finch. They've come to discuss his ongoing care and his eventual discharge." Alara felt a sudden chill. "Associates?" The woman stepped forward, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "Eleanor Vance, is it? I'm Genevieve Stratton, Mr. Thorne's personal assistant. And this is Mr. Davies, his legal counsel." Thorne. The name echoed in Alara's mind, connecting with the half-forgotten newspaper article, the grainy photo, the stitched monogram. A.T. Arthur Thorne. The billionaire philanthropist. The hospital's mysterious benefactor. Her Mr. Finch. Her Alistair. Her mind reeled. The room seemed to tilt slightly. She stared at the man now identified as Arthur Thorne, lying in the hospital bed, watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. He looked smaller, somehow, without the protective shell of his silence and anonymity. "Mr. Thorne," Alara managed, her voice barely a whisper. Genevieve Stratton gave a tight, professional smile. Yes, Mr. Arthur Thorne. He prefers a certain level of discretion, as I'm sure you can understand. He's been most appreciative of the excellent care he's received here, particularly from you, Nurse Vance. He's mentioned your dedication specifically. Alara felt a flush creep up her neck. It wasn't praise she felt, but a strange mix of confusion, hurt, and a bewildering sense of betrayal. He'd let her believe he was just Alastair Finch, an ordinary man recovering from an accident. All those hours she'd spent, pouring out her thoughts, her encouragement, her very self, to a man who was this? Mr. Davies, the lawyer, cleared his throat. Mr. Thorne will, of course, ensure the hospital is generously compensated for its discretion, and naturally, any additional expenses incurred during his stay will be covered. We're making arrangements to move him to a private facility later today where he can complete his recovery in a more secure environment. Move him? Today? Alara's gaze flew to Arthur. He was watching her, his gray eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. Regret? Apprehension? I see, Alara said, her voice numb. The Monet print on the wall suddenly seemed garish, her small attempts to humanize his room naive and foolish. The pigeons on the windowsill cooed, oblivious. Your professionalism has been exemplary, Nurse Vance, Ms. Albright chimed in, clearly relieved that the charade was almost over. Mr. Thorne's foundation has been a cornerstone of this hospital's success, and we are all indebted to him. Alara could only nod. The warmth she'd felt for Alastair, the man, was now tangled with the chilling reality of Arthur Thorne, the magnate. He wasn't just her patient anymore. He was a headline, a fortune, a world away from her own. The quiet intimacy they had shared, the fragile trust they had built, felt like it was dissolving under the harsh light of this revelation. She felt a fool, and her heart, unexpectedly, ached. The air in room 312 was thick with unspoken words. Genevieve Stratton and Mr. Davies had retreated to Ms. Albright's office to finalize arrangements, leaving Alara alone with Arthur Thorne. The silence that descended was different from the one she had grown accustomed to. This silence was heavy, awkward, freighted with the weight of his true identity. Alara busied herself checking his vitals, her movements stiff, professional. She avoided his eyes. Alara. His voice, still raspy but stronger now, broke the tension. She paused, her back still to him. Yes, Mr. Thorne? The formality felt like a shield. A beat of silence. Please. She turned slowly. He was watching her, his expression pained. I wanted to tell you, he said, the words costing him an evident effort. Before this. He gestured vaguely towards the door. Why didn't you? Her voice was quiet, devoid of accusation, but filled with a hurt she couldn't entirely conceal. He looked down at his hands, lying still on the crisp white sheet. At first, I couldn't. And then it was just easier to be Alastair. With you. His gaze lifted, meeting hers. You saw. Alastair. Not the name. Not the money. Alara felt a crack in her composure. His honesty, the vulnerability in his eyes, chipped away at her resentment. The man you helped, he continued, his voice gaining a little more strength, the one you talked to, read to, that was real. That was me. I don't understand, she said, shaking her head. Why the secrecy? The accident. I was running, he admitted, a shadow crossing his face. From pressure. Expectations. The noise. The car. It was an escape that went wrong. He paused. The silence. Afterwards, it was a refuge. Until you. Alara absorbed his words. The reclusive billionaire, overwhelmed by his own life, seeking anonymity even in injury. It was a story almost too incredible to believe, yet looking at him, at the weariness that even his returning strength couldn't fully mask, she did believe it. They're moving you, she stated, the words flat. He nodded. To a private clinic. More security. Fewer questions. He looked at her then, a direct, searching gaze. I don't want to go. The admission hung in the air. You don't have a choice? She asked softly. Genevieve and Davies believe it's best. And perhaps they're right. For Arthur Thorne. He paused. But Alastair. Alastair would rather stay here. With a stubborn, kind nurse who believed he could walk when no one else did. A hesitant smile touched Alara's lips. I am rather stubborn. And kind, he added, his own smile faint but genuine. You made this room a sanctuary, not a prison. The door opened then, and Genevieve Stratton re-entered, her expression professionally pleasant. Arthur, dear, everything is arranged. The transport will be here within the hour. She glanced at Alara, a polite but dismissive nod. Thank you again for your service, Nurse Vance. Alara felt a pang. This was it. The end of Alistair Finch. The return of Arthur Thorne. She looked at him, one last time, trying to reconcile the two. Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice regaining its professional composure, I wish you a full and speedy recovery. His eyes held hers, a silent message passing between them that Genevieve couldn't intercept. Thank you, Alara, he said, his voice carrying a depth of meaning that only she could understand. For everything. She nodded, turned, and walked out of room 312, leaving Arthur Thorne to his world, a world she was not a part of. The corridors seemed longer, colder than before. The Monet print, she realized, was still on his wall. She wondered if he'd take it with him. Later that evening, Alara found herself on the small, seldom-used balcony outside the nurse's lounge, staring out at the city lights. The encounter with Arthur Thorne, the revelation, his quiet words, replayed in her mind. She felt a confusing mix of emotions, anger at the deception, however unintentional, sadness at the loss of the simple connection she'd felt with Alistair, and a reluctant understanding of the pressures that had led him to seek anonymity. A figure appeared at the doorway. It was Arthur. He was dressed not in pajamas, but in a simple dark sweater and trousers, looking less like a patient and more like himself. He walked slowly, with the aid of a sleek, understated cane, but he walked. Alone. Alara straightened, surprised. Mr. Thorne? What are you doing out here? Your transport is waiting, he finished for her. But I needed to. I needed to see you. He moved to stand beside her at the railing, the city sprawling beneath them, a glittering tapestry of light and shadow. This morning, he began, his voice quiet, when they told you who I was. I saw the look on your face. Alara didn't reply, just kept her gaze fixed on the horizon. You felt betrayed, he stated, not a question. A little, she admitted. Confused, mostly. Like the person I thought I knew. Wasn't real. He was real, Alara. Arthur turned to face her, his expression earnest. Alistair Finch was the most real I've felt in years. Because of you. You didn't see a billionaire, or a benefactor, or a case study. You saw a man who needed help. And you gave it, without expectation, without artifice. It's my job, Mr. Thorne. It was more than your job, he insisted gently. You brought light into a very dark place. You shared your stories, your warmth. You even endured my silence with a patience I didn't deserve. A small, self-deprecating smile touched his lips. And your taste in cafeteria muffins is surprisingly good. Alara couldn't help a small smile in return. They have their days. Alara, he said, his voice serious now, his gaze holding hers. I understand why you'd feel hesitant. My world is complicated. But what I felt, what we shared in that room, that wasn't complicated. It was simple. And it was true. He reached out, his hand hovering near hers on the railing. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was Arthur Thorne, one of the wealthiest, most influential men in the city, saying he didn't want to lose her. Alara Vance, the quiet nurse. What are you saying? She whispered. I'm saying that the private clinic, the security, the carefully managed recovery, it all feels like another kind of prison now. I learned to walk again in room 312. I learned to speak again. Because of you. I don't want to go back to silence, figurative or literal. He took a breath. I'm not going back to that life, not the way it was. The accident, it changed things. You changed things. His fingers brushed hers on the railing, a tentative echo of that first, electrifying touch in his room. I'm choosing this, Alara. Authenticity. Connection. I'm choosing to be the man you helped heal, not the man who hid from the world. Tears welled in Alara's eyes. She saw not Arthur Thorne, the magnate, but Alistair, the man, his eyes filled with a raw, hopeful vulnerability. She saw the quiet strength she had admired, the intelligence she had sensed, the kindness he had slowly revealed. The man who likes Tennyson and lukewarm tea, she asked, her voice thick with emotion. A genuine, warm smile spread across his face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. The very same. She turned fully towards him, her hand closing around his. His grip was firm now, reassuring. What about your associates? Genevieve? Mr. Davies. They work for me, he said simply. They'll adjust. Or I'll find new associates. He squeezed her hand. This isn't about them. It's about us. If there can be an us. Alara looked into his eyes that had once been shuttered and were now open, honest, and filled with a hopeful light. She thought of the quiet room, the shared silences, the small victories, the unexpected bond that had formed between a nurse and her patient. A patient who turned out to be so much more, yet, in the ways that mattered, was exactly the man she had come to care for. Yes, she breathed, a radiant smile dawning on her face. Yes, there can be an us. He brought her hand to his lips, his gaze never leaving hers. Thank you, Alara Vance. For what? For helping me find my way back, he said softly. In more ways than one. The city lights twinkled below, no longer a distant, impersonal glow, but a backdrop to a new beginning. The cacophony of his old life, the sterile quiet of his recovery, all faded, replaced by the simple, profound connection between two people who had found each other in the most unexpected of circumstances. The cane lay forgotten against the railing. He didn't need it, not right now. He had Alara. And for the first time in a very long time, Arthur Thorne felt like he was truly standing on his own 2 feet, ready to walk into a future that felt bright and real and blessedly, wonderfully free. He leaned in, and she met him halfway, a silent promise in the cool night air. The porch of their future wasn't crooked, and the coffee might even be good. But the love, that was already perfect. Thanks for watching. If you believe in second chances and real love, give this story a like and subscribe for more.